So my name's Grant Samuelson. I'm the Marketing and Sales Director for Shunyata Research. Shunyata Research is a 25-year-old company. It was founded by a gentleman named Caelin Gabriel. Caelin is a former military scientist. He spent 15 years in the National Security Agency developing low-level signal acquisition systems for the US military. Caelin's background obviously is in science. After the military, he went to work for the Defense Advanced Research Agency. It was called DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency. It's a mouthful. Again, working on defense technologies for the US military. Caelin's an audiophile. He's been an audiophile longer than I have, and decided after he finished his work in the military and went to work in the private sector to try his hand at improving his own electronic system performance. And so he began experimenting, and that was, I suppose, 30 years ago today, and 25 years ago he decided with his wife and his mother to start their own business. I was employee number one. I started the business part of Shunyata Research. A few things to know about us is that we work not just in high-end audio, but our products are now throughout professional audio at some of the more recognizable studio names in the world. We were first discovered in 2003 by the principals at Astoria Studio, which is David Gilmour's studio in London. David Gilmour's studio manager, Phil Taylor, was reading Hi-Fi Plus, and he read an article by Roy Gregory covering our products. And at the time, they were testing a lot of different products to improve the sound at the studio. And based on the review, he asked me to visit to bring a few products. Their response to the products was so strong that Phil offered to make contact with other. Astoria Studio is probably one of the more influential studios in the recording industry, and Phil offered to use his professional leverage to get us opportunities at other studios. He contacted Skywalker Sound in the United States. Their mastering engineer, James Guthrie, who lives in Lake Tahoe now, who also does recording projects for Roger Waters and other music luminaries. James had the same response to our products that David Gilmour did. And so James became a protagonist for us. And when he released the 5.1 remix for Dark Side of the Moon in 2005, the executives from Sony Music Japan came to visit. It was a big promotional release for Sony at the time. And James, as he told me after, he said his favorite thing to do when somebody would come to visit the studio was to do a power chord demonstration, because back in 2005 there were very few people, certainly in the professional industry, that believed that power chords were anything more than a figment of somebody's marketing imagination. And the result of that demonstration led to a phone call to our Japanese distributor to order, I think it was 37 of our $2,000 power chords about 2 months later. And since then, it's kind of like playing a big game of connect the dots. Now, these are only opportunities that we're given. These aren't, you have to buy this, because each one of these studios thinks that they know better than the last studio. In fact, the executive for Sony Music New York at the time called me, and he was angry. He took a confrontational tone with me. He called me, and I thought he was going to tell me that to go get on a bike and ride because we made snake oil. And instead he sounded exasperated, and he said, well, I frankly think your whole category of product is snake oil. And but there's this engineer named Vlado Meller who works with Rick Rubin, and he thinks that we should try your product, and frankly, I don't think it'll be worth their time. 4 weeks later to the day, because it was such a memorable call for me. I'm not used to being yelled at over the phone by somebody cold calling me. And he called to let me know that not only did the products make a difference, but that he owed us an apology. He had no idea the sheer gravity of the difference that they would get. And so from one to the next, we've had one studio opportunity after another. 2 weeks ago, I was at I'm not sure how familiar you are with the group, but Tedeschi Trucks invited us out to the studio. Certainly one of my favorite musicians of all time is their guitarist Derek Trucks, who used to play for the Allman Brothers in the U.S. So we've got a lot of street credibility in the professional recording industry, and a lot of it comes because of Caelin's prowess as not only as a military scientist, but he's also a master electrician. His father's a master electrician. His two sisters are master electricians, and his one sister won the Electrician of the Year award in the United States. I didn't even know there was such an award, but there is. And that's in a male-dominated industry, obviously. So we've certainly, everything is grounded in science, everything. Now, I'm a layman, so I can't answer every question that somebody might have from technical perspectives, but some of the studio work that we did gained us an opportunity in the medical industry. There was a surgeon that knew of us that had read about our success in pro audio. He was a musician, and he was working in electrophysiology, dealing with a lot of noise problems that they were having, noise interfering with being able to see the heart signal. Electrophysiology is catheterized heart surgery. It's basically a way to perform heart surgery without open heart surgery to correct arrhythmias, rapid heart rate, heartbeats. And when they start performing that surgery, they're literally burning heart tissue, and they're using something called a radio frequency generator to burn heart tissue. And that generates, of course, an enormous amount of noise. In addition to that, they have catheter pumps, they have, well, you can imagine the series of electronics they have. Critically, they also have a means of measuring the presence of noise or absence of noise. So they began testing our products. We've been doing that now for 5 years. We're at about 45 labs in the United States. We've just now started testing through a distribution company here in Portugal for Europe. So we're just now kind of starting that process in Europe that we began 4 to 5 years ago in the United States. So our products deliver dramatic, measurable reductions in noise and electrophysiology that have improved the success of the surgery, shortened the time that it takes to perform the surgery, and we've got documentation on our website. We've got measurement differences before and after on our website. They're easy to see. So for anybody that thinks power distribution, electrical delivery systems are kind of an afterthought to the performance of a high-end audio system, electrophysiology and high-end audio are essentially the same, because what do you have here? You have a collection of electronics. Certainly the digital section of that electronic system reproduces a lot of electromagnetic interference and radio frequency interference that is, by nature of the interconnected way these systems come together, this has a great opportunity to affect the performance in a negative way of an amplifier, a preamplifier, certainly a turntable system. So we not only were successful in professional audio and the medical industry, but electronics manufacturers began to become aware of us. So we have strong relationships in high-end audio industry with electronics manufacturers. Matthew Latour, the owner and CEO of Nagra, is a big fan of ours. He uses everything we make. He uses it at Munich. Constellation Audio, Wilson Audio, all the guys own everything we make. It's in all their systems. They use it at shows. Audio Research uses our wire internally. And this is all because everything we do is predicated in science. Which leads me to the Altera system, which is probably our most consequential release in the last, I'd say 10 years, based on the performance it brings to a system. I would, and this is subjective, and everybody's got to find out for themselves through an evaluation application, but I find that as consequential as the Everest, which is a much more expensive. And I'm not talking about the 2-box system here. I'm just talking about bringing 1 box home, making the simple connections to each component. And it's probably the easiest thing to demonstrate because we do this at trade shows. We've done this now for, even before this came to market, we've been doing trade show demonstrations because it's easy. We just set this on top of a component. We play a couple of tracks. We remove the cables from the back of the component, play the track back, and it's that quick. It doesn't take 5 minutes. It doesn't take 2 minutes. It takes about 10 seconds. I also traveled across Germany with this last fall. We went to about 9 different dealers. We went to 2 magazines, and it's very simple to set up. It's very simple to A/B. You don't have to turn off any electronics, so it's not like doing a power cord demonstration where you have to shut off the component, replace the power cord. For anybody that's curious, I don't think power cord evaluation should ever be done that way. Power cord evaluation should be done whenever you can as a system. Part of the reason we've had the success we have is we have a very specific design goal for the products. We believe in getting out of the way of the power supplies, not interfering with the amazing work that the engineer has put into his power supply, because he's already got all the capacitors in there he wants. He's already got whatever inductive load in the power supply that he wants there. So connecting that product to something that's full of capacitors or full of inductors, it's only going to be successful, and it is going to depend on each component. It's only going to be successful if it's a sympathetic match with whatever the reactance is in the power supply. So what we do is we're completely passive. Anything that you try to measure in terms of reactance, capacitive or inductive reactance, it's just not there. So unlike transformers, chokes, coils, regenerators, we believe in leaving the signal alone. The Altera is no different. There are tiny microfilters built onto the back of each post on the Altera, which isolates and filters the noise that rides on the external chassis of electronics. It starts to reduce the percentage of noise that rides on electronic systems. And of course, any RF that's left in the system, we can hear. Similar to electrophysiology, these are low-level sensitive signals that we're reproducing here, just like a heart signal. And any noise that's in the environment is going to affect, whether subtly or dramatically, the purity of that signal. And because this noise in systems that don't use a grounding system is left largely unaddressed, you can still hear that as part of the signal, and you only notice its presence when you remove it. And then you realize just what you've been missing. And I'm a big fan of squeezing every last drop of performance out of a very expensive electronics and speaker system. People spend huge sums of money, and they buy, of course, many times with their eyes when they go into a dealer showroom and they see the big amplifiers or the big speaker system. So suddenly you've got a guy that's got $100,000 worth of electronics and speakers in his system, not really realizing the full potential of that system because there's still noise in the system that's being left unaddressed. I mean, I could go on for a long time about electrical systems because they're so interwoven. They're essentially every power supply in this system. The power cord that comes off the power supply isn't the last 6 feet of whatever's behind the wall going to the beginning of your power grid. This is literally an extension of the primary winding in the power supply. So this is where you have the opportunity to do the most good. And as long as you can reduce noise without adding complication to the power supply, then you've done something good. And the Altera is kind of the ultimate extension of that because of its passive nature. There was a question, could you repeat your question about the electrical ground?
Yeah, the situation is you are connecting 2 times the ground from the chassis. Mm-hmm. Then it goes inside, and as long as I've seen, because I don't have an electrical diagram of what's going inside, right. You have on the other side you have also once again a connection, because the IAC connector has a connection to ground. So you are going 2 times to the earth.
And I'm going to I could try an answer to that, but I would rather Caelin answer it. And I could even, if you're going to be around a while, he's up now, so I could call him and get that answer for you.
Okay.
But I do.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
You mean they're creating a loop, which is
That could happen.
with a loop it gets worse, not better.
Yeah. No, that's been addressed in the design of the Altera.
Depending on the way it's done.
Yeah, it's been addressed.
Yeah.
So that won't be an issue. We've now had this in prototype form for about a year because we like to do very extensive testing before we bring something to market. So by the time something comes to market, I've already tested it in the top United States dealers, Hong Kong, China, Thailand. I mean, Germany. We have the largest distributor in Germany, one of the largest distributors in Germany, with over 100 dealers. We ruthlessly test everything from power cords to interconnects. Everything's tested and compared before we bring it to market. Otherwise, what's the point? Caelin's a scientist, so whatever the answer to your question is in technical terms, he'd be happy to provide that. But I do know that this part of my explanation to people is that the Altera unifies the ground, and as you said, it minimizes voltage differences between electronics. So all electronics have a little voltage riding on the chassis, and it's different from component to component. Sometimes it's a little more over here and a little less over here. When you make a connection and you've unified the ground between all the chassis, those voltage differences disappear. So now you've got, and in fact, there's some products like what's the name of this here?
Ferro-ipsozato power supply.
Yeah, that they literally design that in because and MSB also has a ground cable that runs from the DAC to the amplifier in order to eliminate the differences in potential between the chassis.
You said something about filters, many filters inside the Altaira. You don't use inductors, you don't use capacitors.
No.
What
It's of his own design. I mean, they're capacitive based, but you'll never be able to get a measurable reactive level of capacitance out of whether it's the power products or the Altera. Caelin didn't like traditional capacitors because they ring, and we developed something called the dynamic transient current analyzer, which is similar to an electrician's tool. It's called the available short circuit current analyzer. They use it to test the in-wall wiring before they put up drywall to make sure that there aren't any breaks in the electrical line going back to the panel. And if they don't get the right reading, then they have to go back and find where that break in the line is, and then they have to correct that.
Kind of testing the differential breaker, is it?
Yeah. It's testing the peak current potential of a line. Essentially, we've got a video on our YouTube it's only 3 minutes long. It's easy to watch. It's called the ASCC tester. That's the acronym for available short circuit current. That predicate, we hired a retired engineer to help us design something that was like that device, but could show you on a short duration transient, a microsecond transient, the rise time of that, because for these types of electronics, what's different about these versus our work in electrophysiology is we not only have to reduce noise, but we have to make sure that this is class A biased, so it's and this is drawing off the line in big pulses in microseconds.
They have
120 times a second, the rectifiers.
Yeah, they use isolation transformers in the medical area.
They do, and we've been replacing all of those because isolation transformers, every lab I go into has isolation transformers, and the reason that they exist, the reason isolation transformers, chokes, coils, regenerators, battery supplies exist is because they're marketed and sold, and you want to protect the system from attacks from outside, like surges, spikes, But then also noise. Noise exists out there in the grid, and you want to prevent that from getting into the system. But the main thing Caelin discovered in his work in the military is the stuff that's coming in from out there in terms of intensity and in terms of its ability to interfere with resolution is like this. But the noise that's generated here, because of its proximity to your electronics, its proximity to the source of your signal, is enormous. So because those chokes, coils, and transformers are blocking noise from getting in, noise that's in here has no way to get out. It just bounces back to the electronics. So when I go in and I put our power distributors in there, our power distributors act as two-way filters. So they're filtering noise that's coming in from the grid, of course, because they also have to offer protection. But more importantly, they're filtering the noise, the enormous amounts of noise that is being generated locally. Because noise that's coming from out there, by the time it gets here, noise is generated by a source. So right here, the noise is huge. Once you get here, it's logarithmically less. It's much less. By the time you're over here, well, this power supply can't see very well the noise that's over here. It doesn't have the same effect. But noise in the system is very consequential. And also, when I visit studios, they also have balanced power. James Guthrie had balanced power, isolation transformers. And now isolation transformers, like as a panel, like an Equitech panel, that's fine. There are complications to that. We believe that passive is better because it's less apt to interfere with the electronics power supply, and it operates in two directions in terms of filtering noise. So the Altera has these microfilters built onto the back of each connection post, and Caelin developed the filters and tuned them to the specific frequencies of noise that are most commonly found on electronics. So the radio frequency, electromagnetic, megahertz, gigahertz range noise that floats on the electronics. So that's the functional way that we eliminate noise from that system. Just stepping back briefly to the capacitor question, Caelin developed his own filters because on that short circuit current analyzer that he had built in, so you could see it on an oscilloscope. You could see the rise time of an individual transient of energy. At the beginning of that, at the inception of that transient, if you run that from a box full of capacitors, you can see this big fuzzy blot there that shows that there's distortion at the beginning of that transient. That distortion is caused by the ringing of the capacitors vibrate. As current goes through them, they sit there and shake. And sonically, in our opinion, that causes ringing. So when you hear a transient, when you hear a burst of energy from the system, our comparative analysis shows that with capacitors in line, you wince a little bit, it hurts a little bit. Whereas when you listen to live music, a snare or a timpani or a cymbal has much less of that first order transient edginess. And we believe that a lot of that comes from capacitance. So that's why we won't use traditional capacitors either as these microfilters in the Altera or in our power distributors.
Yeah, but you use capacitors.
They measure that. They measure that way.
In a filter, you have to have.
It's a filter, yeah.
Either an inductor.
Right, but he's eliminated. He's eliminated.
Two of them have to be added.
Yeah, he's eliminated the reactance, the reactive energy, and he's eliminated the ringing. So he designed his own. Does it measure 90 picofarads capacitance? Yeah. Yeah, small, but not enough that any power supply is going to have a reaction to that. We don't believe in inductors because they tend to hold on to the current energy. Same, transformers a little bit less. For me, transformers are like a washing machine. Same with regenerators. We want to leave the signal alone as much as possible. We want to do as little as possible to the signal so we get consistent results across all systems. And that's why the Altera has been so successful. Because no matter what system this goes in, tube, solid state, digital, analog, doesn't matter. We're going to get, if I was telling Nuno earlier when we were connecting, we recommend that everybody do an ohm measurement. You put one pin of the ohm meter on the ground, and then you put one pin of the ohm meter on the place that you might want to connect to the chassis. We always recommend a direct connection to the chassis whenever possible, because making that direct link to where the noise sits is going to get rid of the highest percentage of noise. We do manufacture these products called ground tails that allow you to make a connection to an RCA connector, XLR, USB, Ethernet, any connection you want on the back of a component. We make a little adapter to go onto the ground cable. The only caveat I give people about those is, of course, if you're talking about reducing the highest percentage of noise possible from the chassis, you want the lowest path of impedance possible. So any adapter you use is going to reduce that percentage of noise that you're filtering by a little bit. Also, by connecting to an RCA, XLR, USB, there's always a little circuit board that sits behind that connector. So again, a little bit. So whenever you can, now a component like this that has a ground post on the back, well, that's a direct chassis connection, so you can connect to that. But if you want to be a purist about it, and you can find a screw, and you don't mind, when I went through Europe, I wasn't expecting this, but the Germans anyway are very particular about what you connect to their chassis, especially dealers. So I'd go to make a chassis connection, they go, no. So I had to use these ground tails, and I told them what I'm telling you. Like, okay, I can do that, but it's a little bit. You can get a little bit extra by making, and it's cumulative, right? That's how we design. Every part and material in our products is custom manufactured for us. We don't sell them like Ferutech. It's our parts, our materials, because we're designing things to eliminate junctions, to eliminate the impedance that exists at junctions, so we can draw a straight line from the component to the electrical panel. I mean, in your mind's eye. Nothing's perfect. We'll never get it 100% right. But if you can kind of shoot for that, then you can do something really special. And it's taken us 20 years. And I don't know, maybe there's 40 or 50 different parts that we have custom manufactured for us now, because they all make a difference. And once you start accumulating those differences, of course, that's why we have so many recording engineers that come calling for us. And that's why I know before I go, if I control the system, if I control the electrical delivery system, of which this is a part, if I can install our grounding system and our power distribution and our power cords, because they're all designed with one specific purpose in mind, I know before going in what the result's going to be. So this is, other than Nagra, who we have a very close relationship with, and they use ground posts on the back of their electronics. I'm unfamiliar with most of this system. I know of the digital, so I'm hearing this for the first time, just like you have. But I know if you ohm measure your connection and you make a connection to that point, I already know what the result's going to be, because if you can measure it, if it shows that you've got a low path of impedance to that connection on the component, 100% of the time it makes a difference. And I always leave it to the listener to say, well, how much of it is it, like this much, is it this much? But I've done this many times and only gotten one result, so I'm pretty, not cocky, but I'm confident based on the technology that he's put in here and the number of times. I do all the field work for the company. So I go to the medical labs, the studios, the audio dealers, distributors. So I get to see a wide variety of systems, and I feel pretty good about our chances here.